This lesson is going to be an introduction into noise reduction for film and television. Now, saying we're going to talk about noise reduction for film and television is a little dangerous because it's a huge and very wide topic. It's a bit like saying, in this lesson we're going to talk about poetry. Well, what do you mean poetry? What kind of poetry? Well, same thing with noise reduction, but you got to start somewhere. Now, when you're working on a project, it is extremely unlikely that you're going to complain about the lack of noise. Let's imagine there's a shoot. The sound is robust. The acting is wonderful. There is good articulation, so it's easy to process, easy to understand. Everything's great, and it's very quiet. You're probably not going to go back to your cutting room and go, wow, this is great, it's great, it's great, if only there were more noise. No. Almost always there's too much noise for one reason or another. Basically, the world is a noisy place. So typically, you have to do some sort of cleanup. It might be as simple as a little bit of EQ. It might be a lot of EQ. Or it might be some sort of a buzz remover. It could be a harmonic filter, or it could be broadband noise reduction. It just depends. Now, there are those times when you are insanely lucky and you get tracks that you don't have to do anything to, but that's very, very unlikely. So basically, noise is ubiquitous, and therefore noise reduction is everywhere, and you got to get used to it. Now, something you need to remember, though, about noise reduction is that everything is relative. You shouldn't think that you want to get rid of the noise. It'd be nice, but you probably can't and you probably don't want to, because reducing noise is a trade-off between noise level and the quality of the dialogue. Ain't no free lunch here. The more you cook the sound, probably the more you're going to screw up the dialogue. So you have to make a balance between how much noise reduction do you really need as compared to how much can you get away with. The other thing about being relative is that certain scenes need a lot of noise reduction and others don't. This has nothing to do with how noisy is the scene, but rather what is the scene. A scene recorded on 42nd Street and Broadway in New York can be pretty noisy because you are where you are. A scene recorded at the Indianapolis 500 race can be pretty bloody noisy because look where you are. So you don't really have to cook it so hard because it is what it is. And even if there are mismatches between shots, you can probably solve those problems with a race car going by, or in the case of New York, a car horn, a car by, bus brakes, something like that, and it won't seem at all weird or inappropriate that it's loud. However, if you have a scene, a very intimate scene, in what should be a very quiet location, it's got to be quiet. No camera, no crew, no highway nearby, just the people in the scene stuck there alone with their problems. So, noise reduction is very, very location specific and very scene specific. Remember, movies are not ultimately about noise. Movies are about people, people's voices, the words they say, the energy, the contact between people. This is what makes a movie wonderful. It's what makes people want to see it. It makes it able to touch the actors. So don't screw that up. Noise reduce it as much as you can, as much as you should, but don't go any further. I've already told you that there's zillions of different kinds of noises, but that's sort of an unmanageable number. So for sake of discussion, let's reduce noises into two basic categories. One of them is transient noises. Basically noises that are short, hence transient noises. These could be clicks, clacks, clunks, electrical clicks, those kind of actor noises. Could be a car horn, although that's pretty tricky. Anything that's short is a transient noise, also called an impulsive noise. Now, the other kind of noise problem is ambient noise. Ambient noise is essentially the stuff that covers the whole scene. It could be things that came from the set, or it could be things that come from outside of the set. Essentially, they're like backgrounds. They run the length of the scene. Although once again, this isn't necessarily true. But it's easier to divide sounds into these categories because this way we can think about them in an intelligent way. Transient noises. Where do they come from? Well, some are actor-generated, as you'll see in a demo in just a moment. Sometimes people make noises that you don't want them to make. Things like that, or clicky when they talk, or little things like that, things that aren't really very flattering. You probably, although not necessarily, want to get rid of these noises. Hence, transient noises, clean up the actors. Another example of noises that are generated by actors is clothing rustle. Now, in most films that you're willing to admit that you see, the actors wear clothing. Clothing can make noise. As you see right here is a little microphone. If this were a real film, it would of course be hidden, but I don't care. Now, if I were to move a lot, you would probably hear, let me make it do some noise, you would probably hear the mic rattling around in my clothing. Now, if you get this kind of noise, then both the wardrobe person and the sound person should be fired. But you get a drift. There's clothing rustle. However, there's things like starched cotton that makes a noise. Sometimes in a historical film, you'll have women wearing dresses that are all poofed out. And typically, what makes it poof out is something called crinoline, which is a very crunchy sound. Bed sheets. You crawl into your nice, soft, wonderful sheets, and you don't think it makes any noise. Now record it, and it's all crunchy and yucky, and you can't imagine ever sleeping in that. Anyway, all of these are sources of noises generated by the actor, and they're things you have to deal with. Okay, other kinds of transient noises. Crew noises. It could be feet, it could be dolly, it could be all sorts of things. Now, one good rule of thumb when dealing with crew noises is if the camera's moving, you're probably going to get noise. If it's a dolly, there might be creaks and crunches coming from the dolly track. You might hear the wheels going. You might hear somebody pushing it. It's simple. You see the camera move, watch out. Also the same with a Steadicam. A Steadicam is very quiet because it's not on rails. However, somebody is walking. Of course, they're wearing soft shoes, but if they walk over a creak in the floor or onto a different kind of surface, you'll probably get a crunchy sound. There are noises made by the recording equipment. For example, the microphone. Normally in a boom shot, in fact, by definition in a boom shot, the microphone is at the end of a boom or a fishpole. Now it's held there by a little shock mount so that as the mic moves around, or rather as the boom moves around, the energy is absorbed by this shock mount, so it shouldn't be passed on to the capsule of the microphone. However, things happen. If, for example, the boom person has been recording for 15 minutes and is really, really tired, he might change his grip, in which case the boom drops just a bit and the shock mount can't handle the energy, so the mic goes boo. It's a very low frequency noise. It's easy to get rid of. Before we move on any further, let's listen to a classic actor-generated transient noise.
תגיד, ובכן תדע, בחורה זה כמו אוטובוס. אם יחרת, יבוא אחר. בחורה כמו ראי.
Okay, what's weird about this? The guy's sitting down talking, he's pretty articulate, he has a nice voice, but every time he finishes a sentence, he makes this noise. What in the world is that? Well, we hate to admit it, but this guy is wearing false teeth. I mean, he's no youngster. And the way that most false teeth work, it depends on how many teeth you have to replace. There's a plastic plate up against the palate, and then you got all these teeth glued to it. Again, and it sort of fits into whatever remaining teeth you have. Typically, this plastic top is glued, in a sense, to the palate. So when you stop talking, it can fall just a bit and air escapes. So if you'll notice again, almost every time you hear this noise is in a pause between phrases.
תגיד, ובכן תדע, בחורה זה כמו אוטובוס.
See, those little click things. Now you might not notice these at first, but once they have been pointed out to you, you can't escape them and you will forever hear this sound. Now, so what's the problem? It's a natural sound. It occurred on the set. He's an old man. Okay, he has fake teeth. The problem is this, they're too loud. If you were in the room listening to this guy talk, you'd think, oh, it's such a nice guy, and you wouldn't even notice his teeth. But when you record it, you don't have the advantage of being there in person. When you're in person, you have facial recognition things. You know, you can look in his eyes, look at his face, you can look at his body, and you're there, you're with him. You don't really pay attention to. However, once you record it, all those messages are gone, so you're stuck with this. Okay, that's part one. Part two, it's not a very nice sound. It's not a very flattering sound. And unless you want to make this guy out to be old and sort of decrepit, come on, give him a break. Get rid of the clicks. Even though this kind of actor-generated noise is a little embarrassing and not very pretty, it's actually very, very easy to get rid of. All you got to do is locate the click, then right around it locate some room tone, blast over the click, make a little fade on both sides, and almost always that does it. Again, it does it because you're in a silent space. You're in a room tone space. You're not in the middle of a word. So let's take a look at how to solve this particular problem. Let's first of all find a click that we want to get rid of. Let's get rid of this one right here, okay? Now normally, when you're trying to find clicks, pops, anything like that, you're going to want to scrub. Scrub like so. Because sometimes it's the only way to find something. Now in this particular case, it's easy because you can see it. But more often than not, in this sort of view, you will not see a transient noise like this. So learn to scrub. Now let's try to find a little bit of room tone somewhere around here. Let's take this and copy it and see what we got as far as fades go. Okay, let's play it. Good, it's gone. Here's a before. See, there's a before. Here it is after. Okay, this is a no-brainer. It's really easy. Now, let's say you couldn't find some good room tone right here. Well, logically, this is going to be the same thing. So you could steal it from here and drop it over here, and there you go, you're done. The only problem with that is that room tone tends to change over time. So, I mean, it won't here because it's so close, but the world changes over time. So what you steal here may be slightly different than what's happening here and what you're placing it into. Although you never know. So try it. If it works, it works. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and you'll try something else. But for the most part, in this particular technique, you want to take room tone from as close as possible to the event that you're trying to fix. So since it's the same problem throughout, maybe we'll do one more. That's a big one. Let's see if we can do this guy real fast. See, that's a double, so it's extra exciting. We might be able to do this, grab a whole bunch of room tone here and copy it and blast over the whole thing. That might work. Let's see. Or maybe we can't. Let's see. It basically works. It works fine. The thing is, because this room tone that we inserted is so long, I mean, it's not that long, it's about 1 frame, you can hear a little bit of a doubling. So the question is just, how neurotic do you need to be? This would probably be fine for most applications. In fact, no one's going to hear it. It's probably fine. But if you're totally, absolutely neurotic, work on it some more, find some new room tone, and off you go. Let's say you can't find any tone in this area. So you might want to look, let's say, here, or here, or here, or somewhere else to steal tone so that you can blast over this noise. That's relatively easy, and more often than not, it's going to work. However, there's times that this doesn't work. So you need to create a longer string of room tone so that you have something to work with. So the way I do this is I simply copy my original region and I paste it down onto this track. Notice this track is not called dialogue A, B, C, D, and so forth, but rather it's called work 1, work 2, whatever. Now, work tracks I make so that I can do crazy stuff. Let's imagine that you're a very neat carpenter and you have all your tools hanging up on the wall. Your wood that you're going to work with is nicely organized. Everything's neat. And then you have your workbench, which is this monster. You got things piled up and no one can make sense of it but you. That's your safe place. It's where you can get stuff done and you don't care about the consequences. I use a work track for 2 things. First of all, if I need to open a huge region from my region list, I can drop it onto this track without worrying that I'm going to blast over something else that's further down the timeline. Because what if I do? Well, I don't put anything on the work track that I care about, so it doesn't matter. Second, in this particular example, we need to extract the room tone from between the words. And to do that easily, we're going to use the shuffle mode. Now, the shuffle mode is extremely valuable, and it is equally dangerous. Because with the shuffle mode, you can do something like this. You can say, okay, I want to get rid of those words. So you use the shuffle mode, and you simply delete it. Notice what happened. Everything moved to the left. In other words, it got rid of the thing that I had highlighted. That's great, but the problem is everything down here is also going to move to the left. Not just the things that you can see, which is safe because you see it, but also the things that are downstream from here. So you can easily knock something out of sync if you're using the shuffle mode on a real track. However, if you're using a work track, who cares? Because you're not damaging anything real. So let's get closer here, see if there's anything we can steal that's going to work. Now you got to keep in mind that I made this little demo, I cut it down from a full track just so it's manageable, it's easy to see. So it's a very, very short section here of clips that might be so short that I can't extract any real room tone. But let's see what's going on here. Let's go into solo. Okay, this is all worthless here because it's breathing. Listen again. So let's get rid of all. It's of no use. So that's of no use. Here, it's okay. Let's do this. Let's cut a bit more out, like so. Let's then go back to the normal slip mode, as you see up here at the top. And we do a little fade action. Let's see how that goes. Okay, this is our room tone now. It's not very long. In fact, it's only 18 frames, which isn't bad. Let's listen to it one more time. Okay, it's okay. Now, before we move on, it's usually easier to make a region or a clip out of this combination, because imagine that we have 5 or 10 different little clips making up this string of room tone. It's a little unwieldy and sort of hard to work with, so instead it's easier just to consolidate it into something. And let's say, let me see what scene this is. This is scene 36F. So we label this 36F room tone. And now we have some room tone stashed away both as a file and as a clip, so whenever we need room tone for this particular shot, we've got it and it's quite easy. The last example showed noises between words. It's very, very easy to get rid of these. There are only real 2 traps you could fall into. The first is you simply make a bad edit and you don't cover up the edges of the noise, so you get a little bit of a vestige of it. Or you make bad room tone. You simply make a bad choice in what you're filling the hole with and it doesn't match. But for the most part, it's really, really easy. Now the hard stuff. Very often, in fact most of the time, noises fall not between words but within words. Why is it that way? It's just to make life hard and miserable. You know, that's life. Normally, what you have to do when you have a noise within a word is to actually find an alternate take of that particular shot and cut in the word. It's not as bad as it seems, it just takes some time, and you have to be very sensitive about changing the acting. However, we're not going to show you that one in this demo because that's a whole nother story about how to find alternate takes. So, there's another trick you can use, not on long sounds like, which is actually pretty long, but on very, very short clicks like electrical noises. You can use a tool that most workstations come with. In the Pro Tools, it's called the pencil. First, let's look at a clip, and I'll show you where a click is. It's not a very big click, so you have to sort of learn to listen to it.
And almost my house, so I have to keep a close eye on those 2.
I see.
And
okay, there's 2 clicks here. We're going to deal with the first one now. Listen, it's right about here.
keep a close eye on those 2.
Where he says those. There's a click on the word those. Let me zoom in.
Close eye on those 2.
Right there. There. Now, you could argue, who cares? Why is, it's a nothing click. Oh, it's probably true. However, one by itself isn't a big deal. However, You get enough of these and it sort of wears your brain down. It makes it hard to listen to things. It sounds like the overall ambient noise level is high, which in this case it really isn't. It's a good recording. It's also like, I don't know, you have a dog barking next to your home. One bark, you don't really care. But after 3 or 4 hours, that dog really wears you down and you're trying to decide which is the better option, a gun or rat poison. And because your brain's going, no, 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 I can't take any more. So even though this individual click is truly not a big deal, you need to listen for these and decide if you want to get rid of them. So let's do it. It's right there. Okay, we're going to zoom in. Let's make this bigger. Okay, that's the click right there. Notice you can't see it. That's the way most clicks are. You simply can't see them. Aha! When you're close enough, there it is. Now, as I said, most workstations have something called a pencil, which actually enables you to redraw the graph. Cool. There's a catch, though. At least in the Pro Tools, every single thing you do as far as an audio suite operation or mixing or anything like that, it's not destructive. It might destroy your region, but it's probably not going to go back to the original file and mess it up. So let's say you need to do an EQ as an audio suite event. You do it. It makes a new sound file. So you've got the original and you have the copy, which is the results of your audio suite work. However, the pencil is an oddball. The pencil actually goes back and changes, redraws, if you will, the original sound file. So if you screw it up, you're doomed. I mean, you can do undo right now, and it's no problem. But let's say that you do it tonight. You're dead tired. You do the pencil thing, go, yeah, it's great. You get some sleep. You come back in the morning, and you listen to it and go, oh. You can't say, oh, good, thankfully I made a copy of the region. I'll simply slide it back into place, and everything will be fine. No, it won't. When you copy a region, you're not making a new sound file. You are simply copying the visual display of a pointer which points to something on your hard drive. So, in order to not want to kill yourself later, you need to make a physical copy of this, of the area right around the thing you're fixing. So by far, at least in a Pro Tools, the easiest way to solve this problem is to simply do a consolidate. If you're truly a Boy Scout, you could rename this consolidation 13B08 Consolidate. But most of the time, who cares? Now the reason for this is that, well, let's do it first and I'll show you the reason for it. Okay, here is the thing we want to fix. You see, it's just a little perturbation in the waveform. So if you go to the pencil, and this is where you get to practice your arts and crafts, do something like that. Isn't it lovely? Okay, let's see what it sounds like.
On those two.
Okay, well that's not fair because you didn't have any roll up to it.
Die on those two.
Okay, it's gone. Now this pencil, the upside of it is it's quick and mostly it's fun. Everybody likes the pencil. It's like Foley. Everybody loves Foley because it's so cool and it's so weird. The pencil's simply fun because after hours of edit, think, edit, it's fun to pull out the pencil and go, whee, that was great. But it only works for extremely short clicks like this one here. It would not work for anything longer. See, that's a very tiny click. So something electrical. For example, the old man going, it would never work because it's an acoustic event. It has a heart attack, as you saw. It's sort of shaped like this. Actually, for you, it's shaped like this. And you can see the ring out. It's too complicated to use a pencil on that. Okay, so now in review. We have seen two different ways to solve two different kinds of transient noises. The first is a noise between words. Easy. Blast over it with room tone. The next is you have a small click within a word or within something you care about, like, and there's a click in the middle of my lovely breath. Then you have to do something. Normally, what you'll do is go to an alternate take and replace the word. However, if you, one, can't get to the alternate take, or two, none of them are a good word match, none of them are a good acting match for what is in the original, or if you're just bored and want to try this, you try this, but this will not work for something that's long. Now, the other kind of noise is ambient noise. Ambient noise is really what you think about when you think about noise reduction. Could be traffic, could be air conditioning, could be anything. It's just the junk that fills up a scene. Normally, that junk is not good. But like I said at the very beginning, before you start on your trip to get rid of the noise, ask yourself, do you really need to get rid of the noise? Is the noise hurting the scene? Is the noise helping the scene? Don't be a hero and get rid of all the noise if it's actually serving the story. Now, ambient noise, where does it come from? Some of it comes from the set. Some of it comes from outside of the set. The set. You have lights. Lights typically buzz. If they're big lights, they go because there's a ballast on the light. It's sort of like when you listen to a fluorescent light up close, it goes So you got to think about that. Air conditioners. Air conditioners are horrible for two reasons. First of all, air conditioners actually make a lot of noise. That's problem one. Problem two is that you get used to it so quickly that you don't notice it. Your brain just goes, oh, I get it, air conditioner, and it quits thinking about it, it quits hearing it. The microphone doesn't do that because microphones aren't that smart. They might sound good, but they're not very smart. The problem is not, well, there is a problem of dealing with it, but the best way to deal with an air conditioner is on the set, to get rid of it, to turn it off. Now, if you're in a big office building, let's say, it's not good enough to turn off the air conditioning of the office you're in. You've got to turn off more than that. Ideally, you got to shut down the building, which of course will never happen because the air conditioning units themselves in a big building are on the roof. So as they go, it makes the whole building kind of go in this harmonic thing that's just a disaster to get rid of. Cameras make noise. In the good old days, like up till 5 years ago when they actually had film, cameras would go but there were all sorts of notches and ways to get rid of it. The art of getting rid of camera noise is almost as old as the talkies. Modern cameras, either whether it's a high def or a digital cinema camera, they sound like little baby vacuum cleaners, which makes you crazy because it's a broadband sound that's very, very hard to get rid of, but we got to deal with it. Finally, things like coolers and freezers. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's say you're going to do a shoot in a convenience store, a place that sells, cigarettes. Oh, you can't sell cigarettes anymore, but, chocolate and water and beer. Can you sell beer? Okay. Anyway, it sells stuff. It's going to be air conditioned, of course, and there will also be a cooler for drinks, and there will be a freezer for ice cream and things like that. All of these things make a ton of noise. And again, though, when you walk into the store, you probably won't notice it. But you've all seen films in which some kid goes and tries to buy beer, walks into the store, it's already noisy, and then he opens the cooler to get the beer. Huge noise. But again, you've got to pay attention. The sound recordist must pay attention to that. Now, those are just a few of the possible steady state noises that can come from the set. Outside the set, there's traffic, you know about that. There's the generator. Generator, lights need electricity. Lights need a lot of electricity. So there's always a generator somewhere down the block. If it's a super expensive shoot, it's a good generator that doesn't make a lot of noise. But if it's not an expensive shoot, it's got some rented thing that sounds horrible and makes noise. Anyway, watch out for it. And then there's other industrial noises like construction sound, goodness knows what, but there's all sorts of noises. Now, just like we divided noise into two basic categories, those being transient or impulsive noise, and on the other hand, ambient noises or steady state noises, let's divide ambient noise into two different types. One of them is tonal or harmonic sound. Those are things that have a harmonic structure. In other words, it works like when you pluck a guitar string, there's a fundamental and there's lots of harmonics. Examples would be electricity. If you get a bad ground, there's a fundamental of either 60 or 50 hertz, depending on where you are, and then there's all these harmonics. The best example of that is you plug in your guitar into an amplifier. It's a ground issue and it causes this electrical harmonic. The other kind of noise is broadband. If tonal or harmonic sounds have a harmonic structure, broadband doesn't. Think of tonal as buzz or hum, and think of broadband as hiss. If you do that, you pretty well understand what the deal is. There's a third thing that's sort of outside the loop, and that is if you have a problem that's very, very unusual, like let's say you have a classical concert, and in the fifth row some idiot has a phone that's beeping. That's a very difficult problem because you can't really go back to alternate takes, especially if there's only one take. So there are devices called spectrogram editing which allows you to actually paint out these unusual sounds. I've used it for birds, people use it for trucks backing up where it goes beep, 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 and it's very good. Extremely time-consuming, but it's a miracle. Before we can move on, we need a very, very brief history of noise reduction. I'm sorry to do this to you, but it's kind of important so that you understand better which tool to use for which. Most of the noise reduction devices that you'll use today actually had their birth, or at least their grandparents had their births, in the late 70s, early 80s. This is the time when the CD was released and became very popular. Now at the time there wasn't a whole lot of inventory on CD, of course, because first you have to have the machine, but if you don't have content, the machine won't happen, and yet if you don't have the machine, the content won't happen. So one of the tricks to get people hooked on CDs was to re-release tons of old material. Imagine in the vaults of various music companies the treasure trove of old recordings, whether from the 30s, 40s, 50s, or 60s, great recordings, at least from a musical point of view, maybe not great sounding recordings, but stuff that people want to hear. However, when people forked out their money for their CD players, what were they sold? They were sold, "It's quiet." So they want quiet recordings. Also keep in mind too that in the 50s, let's say, when my parents bought a record, they were playing it on not terribly sophisticated playback devices. You know, it was the old turntable in the box with the prop-up speakers, cool to look at, you could carry it around, but it didn't sound very good. So it didn't matter if there was some hiss or other stuff on the record. However, by the 80s, 70s, so forth, the quality of the playback equipment had gotten much better, so people could actually hear all this stuff. Anyway, for whatever capitalist reasons, it was necessary and desirable to re-release lots of material. So they had to come up with gizmos that would make it sound good. On a record, there are three basic problems you encounter when you're transferring a record and trying to re-release it. First, pops and clicks. Obvious. If your master is some sort of a plate, in other words, a record, pops, clicks, you understand what that's about. No point explaining it. The next problem is rumble. Now imagine you have a really old 78 RPM record and you want to clean it up and re-release Caruso singing something. Well, the way that this thing was originally made, the way the original recording was made, there was a shaft with a motor turning a wheel and there was an engraver. This motor was probably in direct contact with the plate which held the master. So any sort of rumble coming from the motor was passed along acoustically to this device where the needle was cutting it. So it wasn't unusual to get some sort of on these old records. And then when it's transcribed, in other words, when it was transferred from analog record to digital something, there could have also been transcription errors, either in the shape of the needle or in the actual mechanical sound going from the record to the digital. So in addition to removing pops and clicks and crunches and things like that, there had to be some form of removing harmonic noise. And then there's hiss. Old stuff has hiss. In fact, new stuff has hiss, but old stuff really has hiss. So this forms sort of the triumvirate of noise reduction. Today, 30 years later, these are still the same basic issues. The processors are better, they're easier to use, they're more sophisticated, but they do the same thing. So you need to understand basically how these things work. Just like when we removed the click from our dear departed uncle, we just took some room tone on either side and blasted over it. Well, a declicker does the same thing. Here's a click, it looks on either side and says, yep, this is a click. It gets rid of it. Then there's a hole, and it goes, this happened here, so this must be what's happening here. Okay, that's it. That's how all interpolation processors work, just by identifying something, removing it, and then figuring out what to put in its place. Hum, simple. It's basically a multi-band notch. So it's like a multi-band equalizer, which we'll in fact use shortly soon, to figure out a harmonic, get rid of it, and then figure out the fundamental, figure out the harmonics, make little notchy things, you're done. Broadband is slightly more complicated. In an ideal broadband processor, you find a little piece of pure noise. Noise that's not contaminated by content. There's no decay of the symphony. There's no beginning of the guitar. In other words, pure noise if possible. It then writes a description of that sample of pure noise, and then essentially simply play the signal through this. It's much more complicated than this, but it compares at every frequency the description of noise. It compares it to the signal. If the signal at any given bin is very close to the description, it goes, ooh, your noise. And then you can attenuate it by some sort of amount that you want. But let's say this bin, it's not at all similar. So it's, okay, you're not noise, and it just leaves it here, and so forth. And then it recombines it back into normal sound. Now, why should you care? The reason you should care is that as we use these devices, the more you know about them, the more you know about how they think, the better you are equipped to use them properly. Now, enough talking, let's look at something. Here's an example that includes both tonal noise, harmonic noise, as well as broadband noise. So before we do anything, let me just play the clip.
Ay, no me vas a entender, eso es una historia muy complicada.
No, cuéntame, ¿por qué no Lola?
A ver, yo antes me llamaba Virgen de los Ángeles, que fue el nombre que me puso mi mamá para darle en la cabeza a mi padre. Para darle en la galabá a mi papá.
Entiendo.
There's two basic problems. On the bottom, you hear what I assume is the generator. If it is a generator, there's a very low frequency fundamental, followed by a whole bunch of harmonics. That's the that you hear. Now at the top, you hear some hiss. I don't know where it comes from. It doesn't really matter where it comes from at this point, but we have to attack it on both ends. So I think the first thing we'll do is go after the harmonic sounds. So what we're going to do, before you do anything in any sort of noise reduction, please make a copy, okay? This way, first of all, if you totally screw it up, you have something to go back to. But also, you will always have a reference. This is unprocessed. As you do your work, whatever kind of noise reduction, you need to, at every step, refer back to the original. Remember, we are not dealing with noise. Noise is not what people care about when they watch a movie. Noise does not convey the passion, the joy, the pain, the whatever of the story or of what the actors are saying. The words do that. When you're reducing your noise, when you're managing your noise, it is very, very easy to lose touch with the words. You get so proud of yourself, you get so cocky about, wow, look at all the noise I got rid of, that you forget to listen to the words. It's seductive. It's the siren song of noise reduction. But you got to keep an original there, if for no other reason, to regularly listen to the original sound to know what it's supposed to sound like. So, make a copy, as we did here. Now, let's listen. I'm going to turn up my monitor volume a bit. Okay, let's listen to this, see what we can do.
Ay, no me vas a entender, eso es una historia muy complicada.
No, cuéntame, ¿por qué no Lola?
A ver,
There are certain processes which can easily be done as inserts. This one, for example, all we're doing at this point is creating an EQ filter. There's virtually no latency on that, so who cares? You could use it as an insert. Now, the other thing I have to say is sort of a disclaimer. Throughout these demos, I'm using exclusively Waves products. Now, I have access to all sorts of products, but I'm using Waves in this one. First of all, since I'm doing a series of demonstrations in this lesson, I kind of want a certain continuity of product. And waves is very common. A lot of people have waves, so that's what I'm using. I'm going to insert, in the case of waves, it's going to be a Q10 mono. Q10 in this case is a very old-fashioned multi-band equalizer. What's cool about it is that it is crazy and it will let you do anything you want. So for example, if you wanted to put a super, super narrow, look at the Q on this guy, and put a peak or a notch or whatever, most EQs would not let you do this because they say, hey, you're nuts, it's not going to sound good. The Q10 says, hey, you're a grown-up, do what you want, we do not take responsibility for this. So this EQ, or something like it, is very good for notches because, again, it'll give you super deep notches, things that may not be very musical, but they're good for surgery. Now what we want to do is to shop around and find the right frequencies to match the harmonic structure of this noise, which I assume is a generator. So we start playing.
Ay, no me vas a entender, eso es una historia muy complicada.
No, cuéntame, ¿por qué no Lola?
A ver, yo antes me llamaba Virgen de los Ángeles, que fue el nombre que me puso mi mamá para darle en la cabeza a mi padre. Para darle.
Okay, now I've shopped around until I have a peak, a very, very narrow peak, at around 75 hertz, something like that. I'll move it around, you can hear.
Ay, no me vas a entender, eso es una historia muy complicada.
No, cuéntame, ¿por qué no Lola?
A ver, yo antes me llamaba...
So you shop around and you find what you think is the worst low frequency background noise. Once we've found that, we simply flip this over and turn it into a notch, something like that. It's really not a notch. A notch goes to 0, goes to infinity. This is just a 15 dB cut here. Let's make it a bit narrower. Okay, let's before and after.
Ay, no me vas a entender, eso es una historia muy complicada.
No, cuéntame, ¿por qué no Lola?
A ver, yo antes me llamaba...
So let's call this the fundamental, something like this. Now let's pop up and see. Now theoretically, this is at 80. The next one theoretically would be at 160, but life is never so kind. This means that the source of the noise is much more complicated than we thought. But let's keep trying. So,
¿por qué no Lola?
A ver, yo antes me llamaba Virgen de los Ángeles, que fue el nombre que me puso mi mamá para darle en la cabeza a mi padre. Para darle...
okay, it's really not bad. I've skipped number 3. This is 4 here. Notice that it's at 156, which actually is about twice of this one, which is 79. So for all sorts of reasons no one will understand, it worked. So let's make this a cut. Let's see how it worked.
Ay, no me vas a entender, eso es una historia muy complicada.
No, cuéntame, ¿por qué no Lola?
A ver, yo antes me llamaba Virgen de los Ángeles, que fue el nombre que me puso mi...
Okay, if you hear, the bottom end is getting cleaner. And so far we have not messed up the voices. Again, we haven't done anything else to this particular clip. So by A-Bing, we're actually comparing it to the original. Let's do it again.
Ay, no me vas a entender, eso es una historia muy complicada.
No, cuéntame, ¿por qué no Lola?
Okay, it's getting into good shape. Let's do one more notch and be done with it. So let's take this guy, narrow it up. In theory, we could say there's going to be something around 300, but let's just see.
Ay, no me vas a entender, eso es una historia muy complicada.
No, cuéntame, ¿por qué no Lola?
A ver, yo antes me llamaba Virgen de los Ángeles, que fue...
Now, when you hear this horrible sound, don't be tricked by it. It really has nothing to do with what you're doing. It's just the filter is ringing because it's too narrow. It's, again, this is where I said the Q10, like many other paragraphic equalizers, will let you do crazy things. So this is just the EQ going beyond its capabilities. What you're trying to listen for here is a low frequency sound that we can peak right here so we can later cut it. So this is, let's hear it again.
Ay, no me vas a entender, eso es una historia muy complicada.
No, cuéntame, ¿por qué no Lola?
A ver, yo antes me llamaba Virgen de los Ángeles.
All right, we found something around 300. Now let's make that a cut, make it narrower, and let's see what we got.
Ay, no me vas a entender, eso es una historia muy complicada.
No, cuéntame, ¿por qué no Lola?
A ver, yo antes me llamaba Virgen de los Ángeles.
Great. That's all the low frequency we're going to deal with right now. It seems like a very small thing. However, this low frequency stuff is muck. It gets in the way of the feeling of the dialogue. So it's very important that we get rid of it before we attack the stuff on the top. Now, before we go to broadband, I want to see if we can get rid of any of that high frequency stuff. Most of it is crickets, I think. But let's see if there's any set noise that we can find and get rid of just so we don't have to push the broadband so hard. So let's see what that is.
Ay, no me vas a entender, eso es una historia muy complicada.
No, cuénteme, ¿por qué no Lola?
A ver, yo antes me llamaba Virgen de los Ángeles, que fue el nombre que me puso mi mamá para darle en la cabeza a mi padre. Para darle en la galabá a mi papá.
Entiendo.
Okay, let's see if
Ay,
this
no me vas a
can work.
entender, eso es una historia muy complicada.
No, cuénteme, ¿por qué no Lola?
A ver, yo antes me llamaba...
Okay, notice this did a good work on the crickets here. What we need to make sure of, though, is that we're not mucking up the voices. So let's listen to this again. I'm going to just turn this guy on and off and see what we've done to the actual voices.
Ay, no me vas a entender, eso es una historia muy complicada.
No, cuénteme, ¿por qué no Lola?
A ver, yo antes me llamaba Virgen de los Ángeles, que fue el nombre que me puso mi mamá para darle en la cabeza a mi padre.
All right, it's not totally transparent, so I think that we should bump this up a bit. Now, at this stage, it's very tempting to say, wow, this is much warmer than the original recording. It's really much better. If you're the editor, the mixer, the floor sweeper, and everything else, you have the right to make such a choice. The thing is, normally, if you're the editor, you're going to want to try to not mess up the voices at all, at least as best you can. It's true that when I had this guy a little bit lower here, it actually made the voices sound better. But that's really not your place at this point. Your place is to get rid of as many annoying sounds as you possibly can without impacting the voices. So I've backed off a little bit. Let's listen one last time.
Ay, no me vas a entender, eso es una historia muy complicada.
No, cuénteme, ¿por qué no Lola?
A ver, yo antes me...
Okay, I think it's pretty good. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and process this. Okay, so now this first line here is the one that has been processed. Now before we move on, there's one more thing I do suggest. Notice this is scene 27:4:8. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to save this, a preset. We'll call this demo 27-4-8. And this is Q10. This tells us this is what the processing of this particular clip is. Just makes life easier later. Okay, we've saved the preset, but let's now also put a reasonable name on this. So it's 27:4:8 Q10. That's the name of the clip now. So let's move him down to here, move you up to here. Here's the original. Here's the Q10 guy. I'm also going to make a copy of this. Okay, original, Q10 processing. Now, we want to see what we can do as far as attacking this guy. Now, there's a few ways of going about it. The old-fashioned way was to take a noise sample and then describe it, and then run the signal through that. And that's a very effective way to work. Newer processors, though, whether it's the Cedar or the WNS by Waves, or the Isotope RX2, don't ask for a sample. But since this is a tutorial, let's do it the old-fashioned way, because sometimes doing it the old-fashioned way is, in fact, the best way to go. So here's what here's our process guide. Let's see what we can do to it.
Cuénteme, ¿por qué no Lola?
A ver, yo antes me...
By the way, you notice here that, especially on him, he sounds sort of not very good right now. And you think, oh my God, we screwed it up because of the processing. Well, in fact, in this case, we didn't. What we did is we exposed a bad recording. Here's the original.
Cuénteme, ¿por qué no Lola? Cuénteme, ¿por qué no Lola?
See, we actually didn't mess it up. We just exposed the fact that it wasn't recorded very well. All right, so what we're going to do is go to a processor called Z-Noise at this point. Z-Noise is another waves thing. Here we have, get rid of the breath. This is a pretty good example. I want to lose the breath. Let's find something. That's good there. This is a piece of noise that doesn't have any of the significant elements of the shot. So in other words, this will describe our noise profile. Okay, there. This is our description of the noise. Now what we're going to do is going to run the whole thing through the processor.
Ay, no me vas a entender, eso es una historia muy complicada.
No, cuénteme, ¿por qué no Lola?
A ver, yo antes me llamaba Virgen de Los Ángeles, que fue el nombre que me...
Okay, so far all we've done is we've taken a threshold. This is what every broadband processor does. We've taken the threshold, raised it so that it now, anything below the line is being processed. That's how it works. It's just like on a compressor. Here is the reduction. So in other words, anything below this white line is being reduced by this amount. Now in this kind of noise reduction, a little bit goes a very long way. So if you overdo it, which I'll do in a second, it sounds like a cell phone. It's really horrible. So let me show you that.
Ay, no me vas a entender, eso es una historia muy complicada.
No, cuénteme.
It's called swimming by some people, that sort of sound it's around the words and it's also in the background. Listen again.
Ay, no me vas a entender, eso es una historia muy complicada.
Okay, so that just won't do. What we're doing now is a relatively low threshold with a moderate amount of noise reduction. So if we, in this case, keep lowering
Ay, no
the
me vas a entender,
reduction,
eso es una historia muy complicada.
No, cuénteme.
it sounds
¿Por qué no
better,
Lola?
but
A ver, yo antes me llamaba Virgen.
we're doing almost no noise reduction. So let's raise this back to 6, and there's a trick we can do here. We can actually change the curve of the sound or of the noise profile so that we can say, oh, I want to do less mid-range and I'm going to do more high and more low. The problem here is fundamentally high-mid. So let's...
Ay, no me vas a entender, eso es una historia muy complicada.
No, cuénteme, ¿por qué no Lola?
What we're saying here, as we lower this line, which is the line that sits on top of the noise sample, we're saying, okay, at this frequency, which in this case is 1777, I want to do less processing. So if you want to hear more clean 1800 hertz, you actually lower the processor here. It's backwards from an EQ. So...
Ay, no me vas a entender, eso es una historia muy complicada.
No, cuénteme, ¿por qué no Lola?
A
Let's
ver, yo
try
antes
this.
me llamaba Virgen de Los Ángeles, que fue el nombre que me puso mi mamá para darle en la cabeza a mi padre, para darle en la galabá a mi papá.
Entiendo.
Okay, so what we've done is actually, we're able now to have a higher reduction because we're not reducing everything. This area, which was the most sensitive, we're just saying, hey, don't process as much here. Okay. Now, just for fun, let's process this. And I'm not going to save the presets here. And I'm going to call it 2748 Q10. I'll just call it Q plus Z for Z noise. Okay? That's what we've done. Now, let's look at another possibility for doing this. This is A-type. There are plenty of noise reduction devices that work in this manner. There's another type of broadband that works in a different manner, which is this. The Cedar DNS, 1500, 2500, there's several. The Isotope RX2, the Waves WNS, there are many, many more. They work in a real-time way, and it's basically an entirely different way of thinking. So let's do an audio suite here. Noise reduction, WNS mono. Okay. The way this works, and like I say, there's a lot of things that work this way, so this is sort of a general statement. We have bands. However, before you start choosing, this is a band, and so forth, what you need to do is figure out generally what range is your processing going to be. So let's listen to this and decide, are we low, are we mid, are
Ay,
we
no me vas
high,
a
what are
entender,
we?
eso es una historia muy complicada.
No, cuénteme.
Okay, I think we are either mid-range or mid-high. Let's try mid-high. So it's from 330 hertz to 12,000 hertz. Let's see what we get here. So the way this thing works is, it's pretty obvious how it works. You have bands and you have, in essence, attenuation, although it doesn't really work like an EQ. There's a temptation to do something like this, which is say,
Ay, no me vas a
suggest,
entender, eso es una historia muy complicada.
tell me what to do.
No, cuénteme.
But that's That's sort of lazy, and you'll be punished if you do that. So I'm going to go back to full reset. Good. And then go back to mid-high. Good. Okay, so the best thing to do is actually work a bit. Take each band and see what it does and understand what it does before you make your choices. So preview.
Ay, no me vas a entender, eso es una historia muy complicada.
No, cuénteme, ¿por qué no Lola?
A ver, yo antes me llamaba Virgen de los Ángeles, que fue
So what I'm doing is I'm simply going through each band and not just seeing what reduces the noise the best, but what it does to the overall flavor and especially to the voices. So I'm going to go through all 6 bands before I come back to you. So here we go.
Ay, no me vas a entender, eso es una historia muy complicada.
No, cuénteme, ¿por qué no Lola?
A ver, yo antes me llamaba Virgen de los Ángeles, que fue el nombre que me puso mi mamá para darle en la cabeza a mi padre. Para darle en la galabá a mi papá.
Entiendo.
Ay, no me vas a entender, eso es una historia muy complicada.
No, cuénteme, ¿por qué no Lola?
A ver, yo antes me llamaba Virgen de los Ángeles, que fue el nombre que me puso.
Essentially, I like the 2 extreme bands. I like this for dealing with more of the rumble and here for dealing with the crickets. They're both sort of outside the basic voice range, so I find them less problematic for the voice. So let's try playing with those.
Ay, no me vas a entender, eso es una historia muy complicada.
No, cuénteme, ¿por qué no Lola?
A ver, yo antes me llamaba Virgen de los Ángeles, que fue el nombre que me puso mi mamá para darle en la cabeza a mi padre. Para darle en la galabá a mi papá.
Entiendo.
Ay, no me vas a entender, eso es una historia muy complicada.
No, cuénteme, ¿por qué?
All right, for now, it's really not a bad setup. There's still noise in the background, but there's always going to be noise in the background. And what you can't really see in this scene is there's all this stuff going on back behind them, so it might be a justifiable amount of noise. Now, we could keep cooking this for a long time and get out most of the noise, but then not only are we damaging the voices, but it becomes sterile. And then we have to just add all this noise back. So I'm probably happy with this, but this brings up something else you got to do. Let's say you've been playing with this noise reduction for 15 minutes, which is a long time. And normally, when you're doing this, you're not talking into a computer telling people how to do it. So it's going to be a bit faster normally. Anyway, I've got it just the way I want. Before I say this is it and I print it, I try to leave the room. Drink some water, drink some tea, go look at the sky. Come back in 4 or 5 minutes and listen to it again. The odds are that what I've done right now is overprocessed. And the odds are that if I leave the room and come back, I'll go, let me back off a bit. And then I'll be happy. Your ears get stupid after so long. You don't hear the noise, so you keep pushing it. You don't bother with the voices, so you don't care. And you need a break. So let's say I've left the room, I've come back. Hi, everybody. There's one more thing to do. It's the threshold.
Ay, no me vas a entender, eso es una historia muy complicada.
No, cuénteme.
Okay. What the threshold does is it takes this setting that you've developed and it simply determines how much of it are you using. 0 means absolutely everything is going through it. Down here means that essentially nothing is going through it. And you want to decide what is the balance between yes, process, this is what I want, and this is how much of it I want. So let's play with this for a moment.
Ay, no me vas a entender, eso es una historia muy complicada.
No,
No, listen to this.
cuénteme,
It's loud.
¿por qué no
Listen to
Lola?
this.
A ver, yo antes me llamaba Virgen de los Ángeles, que fue el nombre que me...
It's quieter but sort of dead. So let's come back down to here or so. One last thing to look at. Again, this is true on any broadband processor. Smoothing. I won't bother to tell you what it does because it's too long of a story. But basically, if you go into less smoothing, the processing is more intense, more precise, more articulate, but you're more likely to hear artifacts, things like that. If you smooth more, it's almost always going to sound, well, smoother. A little less processing, a little better transitions from one frequency to another, but you lose a little bit of articulation, so it can get a bit slimy at times. Anyway, let's say that we have done this and we're happy with it, so let's just do it and get it over with. Okay, now let's see what we've done. First, we listen to the original, which is this guy right here.
Cuénteme, ¿por qué no Lola?
A ver, yo antes me llamaba Virgen de los Ángeles, que fue el nombre que me puso mi mamá.
Now let's listen to what we just did.
Cuénteme, ¿por qué no Lola?
A ver, yo antes me llamaba Virgen
Now
de
let's
los
A,
Ángeles.
B back and forth. The original.
Cuénteme, ¿por qué no Lola?
A ver, yo antes me llamaba Virgen de los Ángeles, que fue el nombre que me puso mi mamá para darle en la cabeza a mi padre. Para darle en la galabá a mi papá.
Entiendo.
We've actually done less than I thought we would. Now what we've done is we still have the crickets, most of them, but we've gotten rid of a lot of the nasty background stuff. So at this point it would just be a question for you, is this enough? Do you want to stop here? It's quite natural. There's still some schmutz in the background. It's up to you. In general, a good rule to follow is if you're doing this in your editing room and you're going to mix this somewhere else, then under-process in your cutting room. You can always add more. You can't take it out. It's like the cocoa in the milk. You know, you can always add more, but it's really hard to get the cocoa out of the milk. So I would strongly suggest that unless there's an objection to this particular process, this is about as good as you'd want to get it in the cutting room. Now, if you're the mixer also, you do what you need to do. But again, when you're pre-mixing this dialogue, whether it's you doing it in a computer or you going to a mix room and somebody else is doing it, be careful in the dialogue premix. Remember, in the dialogue premix, there's nothing, you're not hearing any tracks other than the dialogue. So there is this temptation to go, it's got to get quieter, it's got to get quieter, it's got to get quieter, because you've got nothing to play against. In the final mix, you're going to have some backgrounds, you'll have some sound effects, you'll have some Foley, you might even have some music, which means that what seems a little bit noisy now will be fine later. Or if it's not, you can always cook it again in the mix. But at this stage, I think this is good enough. Let's look at one last example of using broadband processing along with filtering to try to remove some background noise from this particular shot. But first, here is the shot.
Video sam dampera danas na demonstracijama.
Okay, that's the shot. There's a lot of traffic, there's an air conditioner, there's general rumble. This one is hard, so let's see what we can do. As you can see, I've already made a copy of the original region so that we have our safety here. Now let's listen to it once again so we know what's happening.
Video sam dampera danas na demonstracijama.
Okay, let's first try to tackle this low frequency junk here on the bottom. Let's do this. No, EQ and Q10. We'll use the same filter we did before. Now one thing I'm going to do different this time is to use a high pass filter on the bottom here. Because we have rumble here, you might think, just use a high pass.
Video sam dampera danas na demonstracijama.
Of course, if you go high enough with the high pass filter, it's going to get rid of the bottom, but of course it totally ruins the voice. So it's sort of an absurd option. So we're going to forget that one for a moment. Okay. So what we'll do is we'll keep this high pass available because it's handy to have, and try to use notches as we did in the last example.
Video sam dampera danas na demonstracijama.
That's more or less the center.
Video sam dampera danas na demonstracijama. Video sam dampera danas na demonstracijama.
Okay, we can clearly hear that we're getting rid of some bottom, but what I want to make sure of is that we're not messing up the voice too much. So let's listen to the A-B.
Video sam dampera danas na demonstracijama.
Our filtered example is a little on the thin side, so I'm going to back off a bit. Again, it's always a compromise between how much do you get rid of and how much do you ruin. Okay, let's go to the next band.
Video sam dampera danas na demonstracijama. Video sam dampera danas na demonstracijama. Video sam dampera danas na demonstracijama. Video sam dampera danas na...
Okay, now we're definitely too thin on the voice, so we have to back off here. And let's see what we can do.
Vidio sam dampira danas na demonstracijama. Vidio sam dampira.
Okay, that's about the most we can do on the bottom without messing things up. So we'll save this for broadband. Now let's see if there's anything we can do with filters at the top here, or if we have to reserve all of that for the broadband.
Vidio sam dampira danas na demonstracijama. Vidio sam dampira danas na demonstracijama. Vidio sam dampira danas na demonstracijama.
Okay, first, as I turn this on and off, you can clearly hear how some of the ugliness of this noise is going away. Let's also listen to the voice and see what's happening.
Vidio sam dampira danas na demonstracijama. Vidio sam dampira danas na demonstracijama.
This is bypass.
Vidio sam dampira danas na demonstracijama.
Okay, it's acceptable. It's not really ruining too much. Let's use a couple more bands and see if we can save some more.
Vidio sam dampira danas na demonstracijama. Vidio sam dampira danas na demonstracijama. Vidio sam dampira danas na demonstracijama. Vidio sam dampira danas na demonstracijama.
Okay, this is in bypass.
Vidio sam dampira danas na demonstracijama. Vidio sam dampira danas na demonstracijama.
All right, the filtering is definitely helping. We are thinning out the voice a bit, but I think we can save that at the end of the process. So let's save this just for fun. This is Tilva 07A, okay? Certain plugins will allow you to save presets, others won't. If the plugin you're using allows you to do so, do so. It really saves you work down the line, especially if you run into the same problem elsewhere, or if you do the processing and then realize that you made a terrible mistake. You can go back to your preset and start there. So it's really nuts not to do so. So let's process this. Done. Okay, let's again compare. Remember, here's the original here.
Vidio sam dampira danas na demonstracijama.
And here.
Vidio sam dampira danas na demonstracijama.
It is a bit thin, but I think we can save it once we finish all the processing. So let's try going to the WNS first, see if that will do the trick. If not, we'll use Z-Noise. This is definitely going to be mid-high, I think. And let's see.
Vidio sam dampira danas na demonstracijama.
Again, let's listen to the bands to see what's going to work.
Vidio sam dampira danas na demonstracijama. 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 Vidio sam dampira danas na demonstracijama.
All right, at this point, what's most interesting are these two bands and this band. I think let's play with those first and see what we get.
Vidio sam dampira danas na demonstracijama. 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 Vidio sam dampira danas na demonstracijama.
All right, without trying too hard, I think this is about as far as we want to push it. Now, let's play with both the smoothing and the threshold and see if we can get more action with less artifacts.
Vidio sam dampira danas na demonstracijama. Vidio sam dampira danas na demonstracijama. Vidio sam dampira danas na demonstracijama.
Okay, the last thing I want to do now is to listen to what we're doing and compare it to the actual original. Right now, by going into bypass, what we're doing is we're comparing this process with the Q10 process. But I want to go back to the original and see what we've got. So first listen to this.
Video sam dampera danas na demonstracijama. Video sam dampera danas na demonstracijama. Video sam dampera danas na demonstracijama.
Okay, it's not really messing up the voice at all. The processing could probably be a bit more aggressive, but I think I want to try after this to use a Z noise and see if by using a different technique we can get more noise reduction. So let's save this guy. Let's save this. All right, now I'd like to do one more thing. First of all, let's go back one more time and compare these two.
Video sam dampera danas na demonstracijama. Video sam dampera danas na demonstracijama.
Okay, one thing we're doing is we're losing volume. That's not too surprising. We can just pick it up here, or we can pick it up as a gain process. But for now, let's just do this. Maybe 3 dB, I'm not sure.
Video sam dampera danas na demonstracijama.
Okay, that's good. Now at least, because you can't compare when the volumes are different. Last thing I want to do is grab some tone here. That's good. And go into noise reduction, Z noise mono. And okay, we have a sample here. Now, let's take the whole thing and see what we can do with it.
Video sam dampera danas na demonstracijama.
Notice that here we're already getting some swimming, so this is too much. Let's try lowering the threshold.
Video sam dampera danas na demonstracijama. Video sam dampera danas na demonstracijama.
Okay, I want to rewrite the curve slightly so that in the upper mid-range we're doing a little bit less processing, so we get rid of some of that swishiness.
Video sam dampera danas na demonstracijama. Video sam dampera danas na demonstracijama.
Okay, I'm going to print that. Now what we're left with is this.
Video sam dampera danas. Video sam dampera danas na demonstracijama.
Once again.
Video sam dampera danas na demonstracijama.
All right. Now what we've done is we've taken away most of the ugly part of the background noise. We have by no means gotten rid of the background noise, but again, look where we are. We're on a sidewalk, on a street. It's perfectly justifiable that we have some noise, but it's not justifiable that we have this ugly noise. So let's watch this shot, full screen, and see what we have.
Video sam dampera danas na demonstracijama.
See, that's a perfectly reasonable amount of noise that suits the scene, and it's not ugly. Now we can add some traffic, we can add some sound perhaps from these apartments. We can do what we want to do, but we're not saddled with this ugly thing that changes the mood.
Video sam dampera danas na demonstracijama.
The additional problem of the original is that there's very bad signal-to-noise ratio. So the voice is not punchy, and so it doesn't feel strong and...
Video sam dampera danas na demonstracijama.
See, sort of lost in the background, not so much from a listening point of view, but from an energetic point of view. Now here's the process.
Video sam dampera danas na demonstracijama.
You see, there's better contact between the two characters. So this process job, even though it's not severe and there's certainly no artifacts and it's certainly not dead quiet, does the trick better. So that's it for this introduction to noise reduction, both transient sounds or impulsive sounds, as well as broadband and tonal sounds. There's a lot more to learn, but if you play with this, you'll have a very good start into doing your own noise reduction. Remember the two most important things though. One, don't overdo it. A little bit goes a long way. It does not need most of the time to be dead quiet. It needs to sound good and it needs to sound appropriate for the shot. The other thing is this, if you're not the mixer, talk to the mixer. Find out who does what. Does the mixer want you to do this sort of stuff offline and bring it to the mix? Or does the mixer want to do it himself in the mix? If you're going to bring this to the mix, then you absolutely positively must have an original version, fully edited, on the track directly below the one you've processed. You're in an editing room. You probably can hear pretty well, but it's not a mix room. You cannot hear as well as you will when it's in the big room. There will be surprises. You do not want to paint the mixer into a corner and provide what you think is a proper denoise job when in fact it's overcooked or it's cooked wrong, and then not have an option how to get out. Cut the original, copy the original, and then denoise the copy. Mute the original or mute something so that there is an alternate version for the mix. Anyway, that's it for noise reduction. Good luck. Bye-bye.